Namaste, everyone. Today we are going to talk about a very important subject, and that is regarding the status of swastika in Nazi Germany. And we have two very eminent scholars here. Dr. Koenraad Elst is very well known to the Jaipur Dialogues audience because he has been with us quite often. And Dr. Elst is going to talk about swastika as the Nazi saw it. And Sarvesh Tiwari is also going to talk about swastika as the Nazis saw it. And there is a lot of distance between the two people. And so we are trying to bring about a rapprochement. Sarvesh Tiwari thinks that Nazis thought of swastika as a Christian symbol, whereas Dr. Else thinks that the Nazis thought of swastika as an Aryan symbol. So I will start with Sarvesh Tiwari ji. Sarvesh Tiwari ji is a scholar and uh, his blog bharatendu.com is quite popular. So I'll ask Sarvesh Tiwari ji to talk about swastika as the Nazis saw it.
Let's start
Twen-
with the
20
Rigvedic.
minutes to you, Sarvesh ji, and then 20 minutes to Dr. Elst.
Om Swasti na Indro Vradhashravah Swasti na Pusha Vishwavedah Swasti na Starksho Arishtanemihi Swasti no Bruhaspatir Dadhatu Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste Sanjay ji, Namaste Dr. Elst, and Namaste to all the viewers. Swastika versus Hakenkrauz. So I think the position of Dr. Elst in this discussion is that this symbol, Hakenkreuz, was only a racial Aryan symbol as used by Nazis without a Christian connotation. And he, as a consequence, perhaps independent of it also, I think he thinks that there is no harm in the larger word referring to the Nazi symbol or continuing to refer to it as swastika. He thinks it's a fair translation of the German term Hakenkreuz, the only term that National Socialists of Germany themselves used in their own discourse. If I understand his position, he, after all, himself has used this term swastika in the titles of a couple of very well received, very important works of his own, the saffron swastika, and then almost a decade and a half later, the return of the swastika. In both these works, he has very valiantly and very convincingly refuted with copious documentation the Indian leftist narrative of an ideological linkage of Hindu movements and the Nazis. Nonetheless, the swastika in the titles here refers to nothing but the Nazi symbol. And he is not alone. There are perhaps more than 500 academic scholarly books that use the symbol, the term of swastika to refer to the Nazi symbol. He says water by any other name is still going to be H2O, and using that as a simile, he thinks that it's the Hakenkrauz is nothing but swastika. and swastika is but Hakenkrauz, of course, used in different connotations, but it's still uh, two names of the same object in two different languages. Swastika being more aesthetic, far more uh, better known. Therefore, the name swastika uh, is fair enough. And if I misunderstood his position, I request Dr. Elst G to kindly correct me. Dr. Elst,
No, I
you
mean it's a good start. I'll give some more precisions, but go ahead.
thank you, Dr. Elst. I didn't want to misconstrue the Purva Paksha before I place my argument, so thank you for
Hmm.
confirming. Now, I'm going to argue that for the German National Socialists, this symbol, Hakenkreuz, mislabeled as swastika due to the similarity of its shape, I am going to argue that this was an Aryo-Christian symbol. Aryo-Christian, both Aryan and Christian in their worldview at the same time. I agree with Dr. Elst that for them it was primarily an Aryan symbol. But I'm going to only add that not just Aryan symbol, it was very much a Christian symbol as well. And therefore, as a corollary to that, I'm going to also argue, if time permits, that its continued terming of swastika with an implied uh, connotation of an Eastern connection is not only unjust, unfair, but it carries a very significant real world consequence, especially for the Hindus and Buddhists, not only of India, but larger Asia, living in the West. But before I start, let me very humbly acknowledge at the outset my debt to Dr. Koenraad Elst, whose writings have been over the years my uh, my primary source of information and influence on many matters. His writings have been almost textbooks of study for me. So, however, rebellion being in our nature, my nature, besides disagreements and argumentation between even an acharya and shishya, where they disagree, that has been our tradition, in which spirit I hope Dr. Elst will forgive my disagreement with him. So here goes. This issue is a symptom of a much larger malaise, the issue of swastika versus Hakenkrauz, the issue of narrative, an asymmetry of narrative. But let me illustrate that with the example of two very successful Hollywood movies that came out in last few years. Both of them historical thrillers, period movies, depicting the events of exactly the same year, 1944, during the Second World War. First is Valkyrie, that came out in 2008. It's a historical thriller that explores the 1944 plot of certain German army officials to assassinate Adolf Hitler. In this movie, Tom Cruise portrays Colonel Stauffenberg, a key player in that conspiracy. Now, this film, many of the viewers might have watched it. It's a very well made, well received, uh, critically acclaimed as well as commercially successful movie. Tom Cruise, uh, throughout the movie, is portrayed as a Christian hero who sacrifices himself in resistance against the Nazis. The movie starts with a very uh, grand Hakenkreuz behind Hitler. Entire imagery is created within the first 5 minutes of the movie of a evil antichrist that Hitler is. The conspiracy, or the first time when the Tom Cruise appears, He is wearing a large cross, which hangs right in the center of the screen for several seconds as he has a dialogue with his child. He is there is a scene like that. Then events happen, and then this person, Tom Cruise, and his co-conspirators, for the first time when they start talking about resistance, the place that the movie producers and directors chose is a church, a Catholic church, a large Jesus Christ hanging behind them, and then they are talking morality, and driven by that, they do the conspiracy of standing up against Hitler and assassinate him. Long story short, it has absolutely no historical basis that the motivation of rest of the events are real. It is very historically accurate movie, except for the fact that there is no evidence that Christianity or Christianism was at all a motivation behind their picking up arms against Hitler and doing a revolt. Second movie is Oppenheimer, that came out earlier this year by Christopher Nolan, also depicting the events of 1944, of course, in the United States. Uh, Story of Robert Oppenheimer, father of the American atomic bomb. In that movie, you see the Bhagavad Gita shloka in a scene where he has sexual intercourse with his girlfriend, and then being naked, he will read a shloka of Bhagavad Gita, and then again Bhagavad Gita reference would come at the time of explosion. Now everybody and their mother-in-law knows that Himmler carried a copy of Bhagavad Gita, but nobody in this movie of Oppenheimer is telling the audiences that the name of the project chosen for the test of the bomb, which was used not in Hiroshima but later Nagasaki, perhaps. I think it was Nagasaki, not Hiroshima. Test of that bomb for the first time when they tried. Project was named Trinity. Nobody is telling us that. Trinity, not abstract Trinity, but inspired by a poem of John Donne of 16th century that says, "Batter my heart, O 3% God." From that Trinity, Christian Trinity. Audience is not told that. Audience is also not told in the movie that before the actual American Air Force planes carry the bomb, first bomb, to drop on the Hiroshima, and again 3 days later on Nagasaki, there was an elaborate Christian prayer to bless the bomb by Catholic clergy. There is no reference made to, after the successful killing of hundreds of thousands of Japanese, in the speech given by President Harry Truman, he profusely thanks God, Providence, Christian God, for giving this power to America and not to the enemy, although enemy was trying as well. No reference is made to those Christian association to that mass killing. But Bhagavad Gita comes, just like Himmler carries Bhagavad Gita there, Bhagavad Gita comes here as well. This asymmetry of narrative is the larger malaise, and terming of swastika, terming of Nazi symbol as swastika is just one symbol. But coming back to our topic at hand. But I'm much tempted to mention that the Catholic priest who blessed the bomb, his name was Father George Zabelka, and he was so much overcome with the guilt later on. He left not only the church, but by and large the Christian religion as well. And he gave a very, very heartfelt speech later on. He gave a speech, and this character is not even present in this movie. In that speech, he speaks so critically about Catholicism in general, but Christianism in part, in overall. He says that this terrible atrocity carried out by Christians, I must be the first to say that I made a terrible mistake. I was had by the father of the lies. He is referring to the Pope and the church institution. I was had by the father of the lies. I participate in the big ecumenical lie of the Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox churches. I wore the uniform. I was part of the system. When I said the Mass over there to bless the bomb, there I put on those beautiful vestments which my religion gave me on top of my uniform. I'm very sorry. I'm very, very sorry. I blessed it again, knowing what the first bomb has done in Hiroshima. I blessed it again. I do not know how I will forgive myself. Now, this powerful story not shown in the Oppenheimer. Even the calamity that happened in Japan not shown in the Oppenheimer. But anyways, I'm just trying to hopefully uh, situate our conversation in a larger on a larger canvas. That this topic is not just an academic uh, hair splitting. It has much larger consequences. It has far-reaching consequences. Now, all the discussions that I have seen on the topic of swastika versus Hakenkrauz, I'm very sorry to say, those are not sober, those are not scholarly, those have been kind of agitationist, if I can use that word, more of activist level of discourse rather than serious, detailed conversation. And I hope in the dialogue with Dr. Elst, hopefully we shall be able to change that situation. So then I did claim that the Nazi, in their worldview, were very conscious of the Christian, not just Aryan. And I agree, it was Aryan, of course, but very, very Christian symbolism that they were using when they decided to first use that as the party symbol and then as the national symbol of the Third Reich. So when I make that claim, how do we trace the ideological origin and meaning of that Nazi um, Hakenkrauz? What framework do we employ to determine its moorings in their worldview? Now, here I do not intend to go down the path of tracing the history of swastika or look-alike symbols all over the world, most ancient, most widespread uh, icon that is found in every ancient human civilization in every single continent of the world. We do not plan, at least for today, to get into that. I think we are all in agreement and aware of that. What I do want to do is to trace very specifically the Nazi steps into adopting the symbol, understanding what they meant by this symbol, and in doing so, for doing so, we have to, I think, rely upon two or three things. We need to very carefully read and take them on the face value what Nazis say about the symbol. Not only Hitler, but larger Nazi ecosystem, their leadership, their rank and file, their broader collaborators. What do they all say? What is their narrative of the symbol? Second thing we need to do is we need to look at non-Nazi Christian sources. What do the Catholics and Protestants and all the varieties of Christians themselves, bona fide Christians, pre-Nazi, non-Nazi, and para-Nazi Christian sources, what do they say about this symbol? And third thing I propose we should do is to also understand the larger cultural zeitgeist of the time. What was the ethos of the time in which the Hitler and the Nazi National Socialist movement was based? And what was the symbol and the surrounding thought doing? So for the first, Hitler himself did not use this word swastika ever, not even once. In thousands of his recorded statements, speeches, minutes of meetings, and writings, not even once. He also did not refer to any connotation of the Nazi symbol having any connection with India. Now I know Dr. Elst seems to believe that at least at one place Hitler in some speech has indeed mentioned India in connection with the Nazi symbol. Um, but I will address that later if the time permits and if Dr. Elst wants to use that quotation. But outside of that, there is not a single evidence that Hitler himself ever connected, even not directly just, but even indirectly, that symbol with swastika or India. In Mein Kampf, we all know what he says in his own writing about it and how the symbol got adopted by the party. There, he links it to two things explicitly. He says it is the struggle, it stands for the struggle of the Aryan race, and he says it is representing the anti Semitism. And uh, he says that it was proposed by some other person, but I independently had the same idea. And he refers to his own contribution to it, naming that he gave a color scheme to it, which was different from the proposal, and that he turned the Hakenkrauz by 45 degrees. Now, I have some idea, although it is not mentioned by him or anybody else that I have so far read, but I have some idea of why he turned it by 45 degrees. Uh, some There is some artistic theory behind it. He himself was an artist, and there were some artistic currents going on in the Central Europe, larger Europe, in the artistic world at that time. So that influence played into his decision of turning it, but that need not detain us here. So two reasons he said: anti-Semitism and the Aryan race, Aryan struggle.
Your
That
20
he has.
minutes are over, Sarvesh.
Oh, okay. So I will, I, I will
I
pause
think you
here.
can wind up in the next 2-3 minutes or.
Mm, I don't think I can present all the quotations I have gathered, but in summary, I have looked at least 50, 50 non-Nazi, pre-Nazi, authentic Christian books written mostly in Europe, Catholics, Protestants, all other variety of Christians, and what they say about the symbol. And I do not know whether Dr. Elst is aware of this, but they all agree that it was a pagan symbol, but we have completely adopted it. There are some Christian books that go so far as to use this symbol in their liturgical rituals with a particular connotation that this particular cross will be used on this particular festival. There are Nazi sources themselves who speak a lot about it in Christian terms. Now, time will not permit me to get into those quotations. Second thing I want to place on record is that this dichotomy of Aryan versus Christian doesn't exist in the Nazi worldview. Aryan is Christian, coterminous. Aryan and Christian are not two different things. Now, Rosenberg and so many others, they quote profusely, of course, Mahabharata. They quote in his The Foundations of 20th Century, this book. Rosenberg goes into detail. Hitler himself is very well aware of, he was well read. He was not a fool. He was well read about India also. They quote all of that, but they say that we are inheritors, just like this new Christianity that they were creating was the inheritor of the Christianity of Jesus. Same way, even the other older Christianity that might have gone to India and corrupted there by the mixing of the non-Aryan thoughts and races, uh, that they reject and they have disdain for it. The pristine Aryan, Indian Aryan, they call it, For that they have respect, and they digest it just like any Christian digests. They, in fact, Rosenberg goes into detail of saying how all these symbols, pagan symbols, were digested by Christians. He uh, goes on to uh, conclude his book, in fact, on this note, and I don't have time to quote what he says about it. He says, of course, it is Christian and it is Aryan. So, to conclude, thank you for giving me that 2 extra minutes. I will only say one quotation from a writer that must be familiar to Dr. Elst. Quotation goes like this: the Christian theology stamped Jews with a permanent guilt. They were killers of Christ. The Jews had been reduced to non-citizens and subjugated to repeated pogroms all over Christendom throughout the centuries. Muhammad had also done the same after he failed to persuade the Jews to accept his claim of prophethood. He had massacred Jews of Medina, and his Muslims had followed the precedents. However, no one had worked out the message of the gospel systematically and blueprinted the final solution of the Jews before Hitler arrived on the scene. Human emotions other than religious fanaticism had intervened frequently in favor of the Jews. However, no one before Hitler had grasped completely the verdict passed on to the Jews by the Jesus of the Gospels and the Christianity. The writer is Sitaram Goel. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so he ended with Sitaram Goel. So, Dr. Elst, now we have the
Yeah,
benefit
of
of
course.
hearing you on the subject.
I wouldn't want to contradict him. Uh, okay, well, um,
Uh, yes, that's clever.
okay.
Mm.
You see, to get the background a bit right, we have to say a few things about the religion and the Nazi movement, which is the topic of a great many papers, and many of them not entirely honest. Like from the Christian side, of course, during and after the war, it was very important to distance themselves as much as possible from the Nazi movement. So you get, for instance, post-war, a lot of literature of Nazism as a pagan movement. You see, bringing back German paganism and so on. There were a few circles within the Nazi movement, as well as outside of it, but within Germany, that were busy with these things. The party leadership, and especially Hitler, had nothing but contempt for this. In fact, in Mein Kampf itself, he writes that you see all these neo-pagans are not good Germans, because Germans are with their feet on the ground. They are men of action, whereas these people, entertain a fantasy and indulge in it and so on. They know everything about how an ancient Germanic sword is made, but once on the street a communist militia shows up, they run away. So in general, he had nothing but, contempt is a too aggressive term, but, he had a very low opinion of religion in general. And he himself had been brought up as a Catholic. He never tried any formal ceremony or a formal statement to say that he broke with it. He never did. The church also didn't excommunicate him. So formally he was a Catholic. However, he gives his mind that, you see, Catholicism is something for, only old ladies believe in it. And so, he was into the modern age. He was a typical ex-Catholic. And in fact, here I can speak with some authority because I'm one myself. And there are, dozens of millions of them in 20th century Europe. And now also. I mean, it'll only stop once the church has really lost all its members, which in Europe at least is on the way. But so that's not so special. Um, the the normal human fact is that as an ex-Catholic, of course, he carried with him still a lot of that baggage. And so the main one, the principal one, of course, is anti-Semitism. And so there were very many Christians in Germany who had voted for the Nazi Party, who mainly because of their anti-communism. You see, they saw the threat of communism, godless communism, as it was always called. There were campaigns by Catholics, Rome or Moscow. Christianity was the natural answer to communism. And so they were attracted to the Nazi Party mainly because of this, and for ordinary reasons. It created order in the streets. It made an end to all the riots simply by being the stronger one, the way that, war ends in peace, namely by victory. Then, the usual economic aspect. For a while, you see, Germany was doing good temporarily. But at the same time, and it is perhaps insufficiently realized, in the elections of 1932, which indirectly brought Hitler to power, he had ordered the party propagandists to tone down their anti-Semitism because he realized that the German public wasn't really ready for that, didn't like that. Like in 1936, 38, when a pogrom against the Jews happened, the Kristall Night, Night of Broken Glass in English. You see, he was very angry about it. This was masterminded by Goebbels, one of his ministers, because, you see, he was trying to project to the world the image of Germany as a prosperous and reasonable country where the Jews had nothing to fear. So in those elections also, so Christians on the one hand had a negative view of Jews, but not as sharply anymore as before, or at least that was the idea. And that's how very many Catholics saw themselves. Yes, they had something against the Jews, but not too seriously. Indeed, that is confirmed by Himmler in his famous Posen speech. Posen is now Poznan in Poland, so a city. And so there he gave a speech to SS officers where he justifies the killing of the Jews that is going on, but where he protests that the German general public opinion is a hurdle for that. Because, you see, if you say, yeah, the Jews are our misery and so on, everybody will say, yeah. But then when you get serious, then they all say, oh no, yeah, okay, they're bad, but this one, my neighbor here, whom I know, he's a good fellow. And so, you see, he complains that, you see, the Germans don't mean it with anti-Semitism. That's why the Holocaust was carried out in utmost secrecy. And so that image that he paints is quite realistic. You see, Christians all have learned in Bible school about the Jews killing Christ, but they don't take the consequences very far. There have been pogroms in the Middle Ages, of course, in 19th century Russia also. But on the whole, the Jewish community was relatively well protected. I mean, There were no ghettos for worshippers of Jupiter or of Wodan or any other pagan god, but there were ghettos for Jews. So that was a lowly position, but still they were allowed to exist. And so there you get Christian anti-Judaism, which is not the same thing as anti-Semitism. You see, the Christian view, ultimately the Orthodox view, the church's view, is that Jews do not have to be killed. Jews have to be converted. And so until the 1960s, there was a prayer that was said in church for the conversion of the Jews. And so everybody knew strictly, though maybe they didn't think through the consequences, that after all, the apostles and even Jesus himself had started out as Jews. And so that's why one of the Nazi arguments against Christianity is precisely that it has too much Judaism in it. Now, that was among the hardcore party members, because, of course, all those millions of Germans who voted for the Nazi party mostly were Christians. And so the hard-boiled military men who made up the core of the Nazi party, they tended to laugh at religion. But you see, in their statements vis-a-vis the larger public, they certainly kept Christian sensitivities in mind. Like, for example, they classified themselves as Gottgläubig, as believing in God. So this was to distinguish themselves from the godless communists. So they had a certain respect for religion. So that is simply true. It is not true that, as they say, the Pope then, Pope Pius the 12th, was Hitler's Pope. He did in difficult circumstances what he thought was realistic, namely to save as many individual Jews as possible. Very many Jews were hidden in monasteries and other Catholic places. But yes, I mean, in a larger perspective, of course, he did ultimately stand for a teaching that implied a strong anti-Jewish animus. It was a German tradition of the Passion play of Oberammergau. This is about Good Friday, when, according to the Gospel, the Jews are clamoring for Jesus' blood. And so that was played up, you see, to promote anti-Semitism in every form, both for Christians and also for non-Christians. There they had more the racial argument. But on the whole, there really was a friction between Christianity and Nazism. I mean, Nazism had a different agenda. So, I mean, they were hard-boiled men who believed in nationalism. They wanted to make Germany bigger and, more prosperous, more powerful, and so on. That was what was on their mind, not the salvation from sin by Jesus' resurrection. So to say, they went for Christianity. The swastika was a Christian symbol. I don't think so at all. Like the opening scene of the movie that you described about Operation Valkyrie, there were many people who, as the war went on and became more cruel and also more destructive for Germany itself, who did feel motivated by Christianity against it. That realization maybe came a bit late, but it was genuine. And so you do have Christian resistance groups like the Weiße Rose, the White Rose, You have on the Protestant side, you have the Bekennende Kirche. So that was an anti-Nazi group within the church, whereas officially they were pro-Nazi. Deutsche Christen, German Christians. But so this is a very complicated landscape. Now, as for the swastika within that, to say that the swastika was a Christian symbol, well, I'm very curious about your quotations, really am. Because, of course, obviously, and everybody at that time already knew that it was a pre-Christian symbol. Clearly, people didn't need the Christian message to feel enthusiastic about the swastika. It was simply, just like in India, just like among the Navajos in Arizona, and in Troy and in Greece and in the Baltic and so on, it was a good luck sign. And so I've seen in all these American discussions about the status of the swastika and whether it should be banned and so on, the claim that it was a symbol of evil. But you see, that is the Hollywood version of Nazism. You see that they had evil on their mind all the time. No, they thought they were doing good. You see, that's the real problem with humanity, that there is so much evil being done by people thinking they are doing good. And so they were not going to drape any curses on their wall. You see, they saw the swastika as a very auspicious sign, just like Indians and so on do. So they didn't see this as a separate symbol that has a separate name, Hakenkreuz. Of course not. Hitler himself described the swastikas on the temple walls in India and Japan as Hakenkreuz. The two words were simply synonym. You see, you have a gammadion in Greek, a cross with the forearm shaped like the letter gamma, which is a hook. You have the hooked cross in English. You have the tetraskelion, the cross with, or the sign with 4 legs, and so on. You have the manji or wanzi in Japan and China, which literally means the character, the symbol of 10,000. The character 1 means 10,000. So you have different names, different approaches, but those are no more special than simply the fact that while you drink pani, I drink water. But you see, water and pani are both the same substance, aren't they? And so the Hakenkreuz simply means the same thing as the swastika. There are also many German, somewhat academic papers about this, where the synonymy of Hakenkreuz and swastika is affirmed quite explicitly. So there's a lot more to say about this history, but let's quickly come to the issue that animates people there in the swastika debates in the States. The difference is simply one of languages. You could also say the difference is between the shape of the symbol and the meaning of the symbol. You see, in German, in Greek, the shape is described, the hooked cross. In India, a meaning is given, namely the good luck sign. But of course, the good luck sign happens to have a shape, which is a hooked cross. I mean, you could take any other shape and call it good luck sign. Indeed, you see, in Tibet, they have a list of 8 different symbols that are 8 lucky signs. So you see, the word swastika doesn't really describe this shape. Anyway, it has come to be associated with that shape, which is exactly the shape described by hooked cross, Hakenkrauz, and so on. They are simply synonymous. And so trying to make a whole story about the different words is really beside the point. I mean, especially for the purpose that you do it for. You see, when people see a swastika sign, they don't ask, you see, what is this called? You see, they see a swastika sign, it is that shape which offends them. And so there are no shortcuts as this fuss about the words for the sign is there are no shortcuts for going through the laborious and difficult task of explaining to the general public what the real story is. Namely, the swastika was a pre-Christian symbol over most of the world. And so Hitler at that point got fascinated with that sign, maybe helped by his own personal fascination with all things Greek and the discovery by the German businessman Heinrich Schliemann of the city of Troy. So both in Greece and in Troy, swastikas were aplenty. The Nazi Party was partly founded, or among its earliest recruits were German soldiers returning from the Baltic states, where they, after the First World War, they came home, they had nothing to do. It's always a problem, ex-military men, keeping them busy. So they went to fight another war against the Bolshevik attempt to annex the Baltic states. They won, they came home, and many of them joined the Nazi Party. And so there too, you see the swastika is a very common symbol, like in India. So you see, he got enamored of that sign, and he wanted to channel the good energies of that sign to the problem that he was starting. There's nothing much deeper to that. You see, small events in his life could have led him to take another sign. There's no profound meaning to that, and there's certainly no effect of that sign. You see, many people who are against the swastika, they have this superstitious implied belief that the swastika exercises some very negative power over its surroundings. Of course, it does not. You see, it is just simply a visual design. And yes, it is swastika. It is beneficial. It is auspicious. Why? Because it represents the whole, the totality. You see, the complete cycle is pictured, and that's auspicious. Among some peoples, like among part of my ancestry, the Celtic people, it counted as extremely inauspicious to have a limb missing. You see, among the Celts, if the prince, the crown prince, lost an arm in a fight or something, then he could not become the king anymore, because they didn't want to be reminded all the time that they looked at the throne. Oh, there's someone sitting who embodies incompleteness. So the swastika represents completeness, and that's good. And that's good for anyone who looks at
your
it.
20 minutes are over.
Well,
20,
I don't
22
need
minutes are over.
any more minutes. I think I made my point. The swastika is innocent. Well, I'll add one sentence that ultimately, of course, Sarvesh, about the practical implications, we are in total agreement. The demonization of the swastika has to go.
Okay, Sarveshji, your time for any rejoinders?
No rejoinders. I think maybe a couple of small points. So, Dr. Elst, that supposed statement of Hitler, where he said that in his speech that Hakenkrauz is visible on the temple poles or posts of India and Japan. I hope you apply the critical historical investigation on that speech. So I did a bit of research on it, and if I were a Muslim muhaddis, I'm going to say that that hadith of Hitler is not only not Sahih but not even Hasan. It is Zaif hadith. The supposed speech that Hitler gave, where he said that, was on supposedly 13th of August of 1920. Now, he was less than 1 year old in the party. He was not even the Führer of the newborn party. And yet, you suddenly have this document which has complete speech of Hitler of 13th of August of 1920. Complete speech is available now, which runs into 33 pages of German. And this speech was suddenly discovered in late 1960s, more than 4 decades after the supposed speech. So some logical questions should immediately appear. What happened to the other speeches of Hitler? Why only this speech is available? All the historians of Hitler, the biographers and scholars on Hitler's life, they agree. Authentic speeches of Hitler are recorded only after 1922, which used to be printed in the Nazi papers. And of course, once he got power, then widespread. But speeches of Hitler before 1922, when he was nobody, who will bother to sit down and take notes? He used to speak extempore. He used to have one small piece of paper with only jotted down a few points. But he was a marvelous orator. He did not need prepared speeches. This document, which suddenly appeared in late 1960s, is also by only one single German scholar. He says that secret police of the Weimar establishment would transcribe the notes of these speeches. Now, there were more than 25 parties bigger than National Socialists. They were not even properly called National Socialists when he gave that speech. That party was less than 1 year old, was not even in electoral politics. Why would police bother so much to take word for word notes of a leader who is not even the main leader of the party? Eckhart, who is political guru of Hitler, was alive. He was in this meeting. He was the chief of the DAP at that time. Why would this policeman take notes of Hitler's speech but not of the Eckhart speech? And then the content. And then look at the content of the speech. I, with a lot of pain, went through the speech in German, tried to translate it painfully in English and then understand it. The speech is about why we are against Jews. Now, if Hitler, clever orator as he was, if he has to talk about why we are against Jews, don't you think what will be the biggest weapon in his speech? It will be the religious argument. But here in this speech, which went on for 2 hours, where he was interrupted 57 times according to this document, with applause and so on, not once does he bring out that Christian hatred of that whole argument of anti-Semitism or anti-Judaism. Not once.
Of course.
So this whole speech is very suspicious. Nobody puts credibility into it. Internet is full of fakery. The fake diaries of Hitler were sold for millions. Only later people came to know these were fakes. Letters of Hitler, paintings of Hitler's, artworks of Hitler which he sold in Vienna and Munich are sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they are fakes. So I think, and I will not go so far as to claim I know, but I think it is very, very, very doubtful. Newspapers might have reported the gist of the speech. paper, it was just post-war depression era. People didn't have that much of paper. Paper was expensive. To print a 33-page long speech in 1920. So be careful in putting too much credibility on that. That's one. Second, what is a Christian? You talked about post-Catholic, etc. I would argue, I go back to your wonderful book, Who is a Hindu? In that, the very first section of that book, Dr. Elst, you start with cradle definitions. In the cradle definitions, and it's been 20, maybe 25-year-old back, so you might not remember. In that cradle definitions, you start with saying that it's so difficult to define Hinduism. Many have tried, many have failed. And then to illustrate that, you say a Catholic is defined by such and such creed. A Muslim is defined by La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. That's it. But I would slightly challenge that notion. Apply cradle definition on Christian today. Who is a Christian? Which creed can cover all shades and forms of Christian, ranging from Roman Catholics to all varieties of Reformists, Lutherans, Calvinists, and other Protestants, as well as people who completely deny Trinity, or Unitarians, or scientific Christians, or Christian Scientist Church, or Mormons, and so on. They are all Christians, self-identified Christians. Which cradle definition applies to them all? And I will propose, there is a simple definition that can apply, which is anybody in whose religious belief Jesus Christ of Nazareth, historical or imagined, plays a unique central role, and who self-identifies himself as a Christian, is a Christian. You cannot go farther than that to define a Christian. Otherwise, you cannot cover all shades of Christians today. And this definition was also true of Nazi Germany. The Nazis, for them, they said in their own established policy, point number 24 of party program, that Nazi party stands for positive Christianity.
That is true.
Which literally meant that Jesus Christ we believe in, but number one, we don't believe in churches. We don't believe in confessional denominations, most particularly Catholic Church. In practical sense, they said, we don't like this mysticism, otherworldliness, especially of the Catholics. They said, we reject the Old Testament. They said, in fact, Hitler wrote a manuscript in 1919. Hitler was a very scholarly person. Do not undermine his scholarship. Hitler wrote a manuscript. It remains unpublished. But in last few years, a couple of German historians have published that manuscript with commentary. In one whole chapter of that manuscript, his worldview about what he wanted to achieve, that whole thing is about theology. There, he very clearly says, Old Testament gone, and New Testament critical lens applied. All these Luther and Luke and Matthew, all these Jews, I refuse them. I do not want to look at Jesus, my Lord, through the eyes of these corrupt Jews. Now he was 100 years ahead of his time. Nowadays, you see that happening. The Q Gospel or Q Book of Gospel, the work of Burton Mack, where he does exactly that, identify non-Jewish, pure Jesus Christ source of gospel. That Hitler wanted to do. Hitler remained a Catholic. He paid, even when he was practically starving, he paid every year tax money to Catholic Church, and he continued to pay till the day he committed suicide, every quarter in his tax returns. In fact, there is a tax return filed by Hitler in 1923 that was auctioned in New York this year, 100 years later. In that, it's a very interesting thing. His income was very small. Only source of income was royalty from Mein Kampf. That was the only source of income. And still, he made sure to declare his faith as Catholic and pay that 8% or 9% surcharge on tax to Catholic Church. And he paid that every quarter. He was into tax troubles many times. There was a summon issued even when he became Chancellor of Germany in 1933. There was a summon issued against him that you have back taxes. But every time he will pay to the Catholic Church. Never did he say that I'm leaving church. A lot of Nazis left church, a lot of leadership and rank and file. He did not. Also, the corollary, the contrary, Catholic Church excommunicated so many people. They excommunicate people so easily. Was Hitler excommunicated by Catholic Church? No. He remained a Catholic on his side. He remained a Catholic by the Catholic Church also. And he remained a Catholic in his private conversations as are recorded. And of course, in his speeches, which you can say that it was political convenience that he was talking. Actually, he was not. He was a genuine Christian, as genuine a Christian as Muhammad Ghaznavi was a Muslim. He was a product of Christianity, the Christianity of the fact that Sitaram Ram Goel talked about. That's the 2 points I wanted to say.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Elst, anything you want to say?
Yes.
I ask you a question.
Yeah, about whether this speech is genuine, that requires investigation. You see, that I can't. I only know that very few subjects are as thoroughly studied as the Nazi period and Hitler personally. So, and I know about that speech already for years. If there had been something wrong with it, I think I would have heard of it by now. Somebody would have made sure to show that in detail. Anyway, you might be the first one. I don't underestimate you. Like, I know your textual criticism, for example, about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which appears apparently first in a fable collection where it has a very negative meaning. However, in that fable collection, as I noted before, it is being quoted by a negative character precisely to give authority to what he is doing. So apparently that maxim had some authority in that society at that time. And so you have looked further and shown that there's an earlier text, the, I think, Maha Upanishad, where the text is quoted in seriousness, not satirically. So with a lot of research work, finally uncovered this. So who knows? So I mean, so it's that same approach I hear in this case. However, there are circumstances such as the enormously intense investigations about the Nazi movement that make me put provisional faith in the genuineness of the document. Anyway, the document is not important for my thesis. What I've been saying is simply that Hakenkrauz and swastika are synonyms, which they are, which many Germans before Hitler had shown already. So that remains the case. About its Christian character, you see, once the swastika became fashionable, then all kinds of people showed, you see, that they had something to do with it. There is a Jewish rabbi at the time who wrote about the swastika being a Jewish symbol. And so there are synagogues where, as a floor or wall design, you do find swastikas. But so that's what it was. It was ornamental. And so here and there you do find it in churches. But that doesn't make it a Christian symbol. In that case, I would have to ask, okay, of what is it a symbol? So I am really not convinced of that. It's a universal symbol, which was put in the center by Hinduism, by the Native Americans. and so finally by the Nazis. And once it was there, of course, there was all kinds of exegesis about it, that this symbolizes the struggle of the Aryan man against world Jewry and so on. Well, all that is not in there. The symbolism of a swastika is fairly straightforward. It's a cosmic cycle. It's the planets turning around the sun and so on. And so that is a positive sign because of it. It evokes completeness, and that in itself is a happy notion.
Yeah, in fact, Dr. Elst, Christians, theologians, they interpret swastika very specifically. They very clearly say it's a symbol of redemption, symbol of Christ coming back again. They have very specific meanings to those, and they go to liturgical detail. They say that this was abandoned in 15th century. Up to 15th century, this symbol was very Christian symbol, and particularly for the northern Christianity, as the Nazis would call themselves, the Christianity of the Nordic people and Scots, etc. And there is I discovered one source which actually talks about transition from pagan to the Christian. Very, very, it got translated into a popular myth also. But all of that was lost after the Reformation of Luther. After Luther came, all of that was forgotten by the Christian world until again rediscovered in the 19th century, before Nazis. So they rediscovered that, yes, this symbol, what you prefer to call swastika, is a Christian symbol. Not that they do not acknowledge that it was not pagan. They very much say it was pagan. In fact, they apologists, they are great apologists, right? They say that pagans before the birth of Jesus were anticipating with this symbol that Jesus would come and redeem us. That's what the meaning of that symbol in the pagan world was. So there is this, there is the highest ranking Indian who reached the highest ranks in Catholic Church. His name is, don't laugh, Sanjay ji. His name is Lodu Swami. So this Lodu Swami, that's his name. I can't help it. Lourdu Swami. So Lodu Swami, he in 1968, he was in Vatican. He was, I don't know what his rank was, but he was very senior. He used to live in Vatican. He directly was dealing with Pope. He was heading some church committee, Pope's committee, directly supervised committee for expansion of Christianism in Christianism in unreached populations or something like that. So he came up with a 12-point program in 1968 or 69 for adaptation of Christian faith in Indian people, among Indian people. And these 12 points, they kind of remind you of what Christians of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd centuries would have done. Or in case of later converts of Northern Europe, the Norwegians, etc., in the 10th, 9th, 10th century, or so on. So there, in the 12th point, he says arti that Hindus do, Christians should start doing. Instead of raising hands up in prayer, Christians learn to do namaste, so on and so forth. And in fact, Rosenberg, in his book, Top Nazi, one of the influential Nazis, explains this process of Christians, of how they took over Sunday, for example. The Sabbath day was Saturday, but these guys took over. He explains a lot of other things. The direction, for example, the direction, Qibla of Muslims. What is Qibla of Christians? Facing the east. For the Qibla of Jews.
For the rising sun, like in Hinduism.
No, that's a later explanation, rising sun. It's not rising sun. The Christian apologists of the 3rd, 4th, 5th century, they say Christ will come from that direction. Christ, when he comes again, He will come from east. Now earth is not flat, so there is no constant east in which Christ will come. So if east for you, maybe west for some church in India. But in fact, Emperor Julian, in one of his comments against Christians, he says, you worship sun, you don't even know. You worship Sol Invictus, but you just don't know it. And one of the...
Obviously, a lot in Christianity is borrowed from paganism.
Yeah.
I mean, that is true. And many things far more explicitly than the Hakenkrauz or swastika. You see Christmas, for example, and then other objects get a different meaning, like the cross existed in Celtic religion, for example. And so that cross is given a new meaning in Christianity. So there is a continuity, of course. But you see, in the case of Hitler, to confine ourselves to that, very obviously, he, in his time, in his culture, was simply fascinated with the pre-Christian origin, the Greek, Trojan, Baltic origin of the swastika. And that was good enough for him. He thought in ethnic terms more than in religious ones. So as for Hitler's religion, I repeat and I maintain that Hitler was an ex-Catholic, no matter what he did in public. In his table talk from during the war years, at the end of his life, he's quite explicit about, he's quite scornful, both about neo-paganism, which existed very marginally, but which after the war strongly got associated with the Nazis. As for his own Catholicism, he mocks it, he laughs at it. So I definitely think he was ex-Catholic. Nevertheless, he was doing the diplomatic thing with the Catholic public, with the Catholic institutions, which at the time still represented the real power. And it is true that Catholics in Europe often, outside Germany, allied with the Nazis. This is in the Bishop Tiso in Slovakia, the Croats, Spain was not really fighting the war on the Nazi side, but at least was helped by the Nazis and so on. So there, I agree that there is a prima facie connection between the Catholic Church and the Nazi movement. Nevertheless, on the Catholic part, that was, hoping that it would be over soon because they didn't like this bedfellow. And so, yes, there were Catholics that said, we have to fight the Jews. Mainly at that time, when we talk about fighting, they had to fight the communists. That was very, very strongly present. And there you could say the church somewhat prepared the atmosphere under which many people in the occupied countries joined the Waffen-SS, the SS army units, to go fight against the Soviets. But again, you see that's not Christianity per se. There was simply the idea that we have to keep Christianity alive. There are all kinds of strange characters in the war situation. Like, for instance, in my country, there was a priest, Cyril Verschaven, who called for young men to go fight in the Nazi army against the Soviets, but who at the same time tried to convert Heinrich Himmler to Catholicism. There are all kinds
well over
of
time, Dr.
bizarre human circumstances.
We are
Sanjay?
well over time. We are 15 minutes over time now.
Yeah, that's because the subject is so important. But you see, to sum up, I think that Hindus make it a bit too easy on themselves by building their case of the acceptability of the swastika on this existence of different words in different languages. You see, that's such an obvious thing that cannot help to justify this. Of course, there are different words for it in different languages.
You know,
That's not
you know
what
about
makes the difference.
Dr. Elst, let me share with you. I think you might be knowing this because there was a move there was a move against swastika, and they wanted to ban it in New York State. And then the Hindus, they
Hmm.
started a movement and they started liaising with the Jews, and uh, they and the Jews, they held meetings, they held discussions, and ultimately the Jews, on behalf of the Hindus, they pleaded that okay, this is not that symbol
Yeah.
that Hitler was using, and a way was found in which the Jews found it acceptable that the swastika, the ancient Hindu symbol, is not exactly what a Hakenkrauz is.
Mm.
So, if the Jews could
Mm.
agree to that, I think why should the others have any problems?
I agree. I
And
think
and, and this is only 1 year old case.
yeah, yeah. No, it has happened in Australia as well. Has happened in UK. So that's one part of it we should continue doing. But I would suggest something even more bold and explosive. International Red Cross. Their symbol is nothing but Christian cross in disguise. It is
Yes,
Switzerland's flag,
absolutely.
but it is
Yeah,
cross.
yeah, of course.
Now,
Mm.
one interesting thing which Dr. Elst, I do not know if you paid attention to it or if you know. At the beginning of the World War II, of course, Red Cross got involved, and uh, everybody anticipated that Hitler would enforce the uh, Hakenkrauz to be the German Red Cross symbol. But not once. He agreed to the Red Cross to be used in Germany as well. Why?
Mm.
That is also Christ symbol. This is also Christ symbol. Why do I care? Red
Mhm.
Cross, he agreed to. Now, what I'm going
Well,
to propose is something this. Yeah.
well,
So
you see, here you might, for completeness sake, also add that in the 50s, Sri Lanka and I'm not sure about India, certainly Sri Lanka proposed to have the red swastika
that exactly
because there's
that is
also an Islamic variety, the red
uh,
crescent. So they would have the red swastika for the
it's,
subcontinent.
so it goes before
Uh,
that. Muslim countries
Yeah.
objected. They said this Crusaders cross I'm not going to accept, or Christian cross. So they got the red crescent.
I think we
All
have to
Muslim
end
countries
this
use
now.
that. India should say we want red swastika as well as red cross instead of red cross.
So I think at
Hmm.
that point of agreement, it's time to wind up today's discussion. It was very interesting. I think
Hmm.
both Sarvesh and Dr. Els had points, and we seem to have reached some sort of agreement, though not exactly a full agreement. But then I think it's a good beginning, and maybe we can come back after a month or so, after investigating our positions further, and maybe we can engage
Hmm.
in one more very scholarly discussion as this one was. So thank you very much,
Hmm.
Dr. Elst and Sarvesh. Thank you for this scholarly discussion, and I'm sure that we will get a lot of comments and maybe a lot of other information as well. Thank you.
Okay.
Jai
Thank
Hind,
you.
Vande Bharat,
Namaste.
Vande Mataram.
Vande Mataram.
Namaste.
Shubham Bhuyat.